Welcome to CEO Insights, the program that interviews chief executive officers and other senior management people here in Vietnam who are operating in famous and well-known businesses. And I'm delighted today, really delighted, to introduce Christina Yu, who is the creative director of Ipa-Nima, the company that makes handbags and other fashion accessories for ladies here in Vietnam and abroad. Christina, welcome aboard.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Great pleasure, really good pleasure. I'm going to start with the same question that I always start with, which is, why Vietnam?
So many people have asked me that same question. I suppose you have to ask God, because my husband was a partner with Baker McKenzie, the law firm in Hong Kong, and he was sent here in 1993 to set up Baker McKenzie in Vietnam, and I followed suit in 1995, and that's how I ended up in Vietnam. I'm originally from Hong Kong, so if I've married a different guy, I probably would not be here.
And why handbags?
When I was here in 1995, there is not much of a fashion scene. And although I was a lawyer by training also, I happened to write for magazines on fashion in Hong Kong. Okay. So I already have an interest in fashion at the time. And I saw that in Vietnam, you know, there is obviously a lot of ladies. There was a lot of tailors at the time who was making clothes for ladies, but there is no one actually specializing in accessories. And I feel that accessories, or handbags in particular, is going to be a big fashion item very soon. So I've decided to focus my energy in doing high quality handbags. And I also wanted to focus on export. So if I do clothes, I have to make different patterns to suit women of Asian sizes, European sizes, American sizes. And I'm not a pattern cutter by training. Right. So I think that accessories was an easier industry for me to get into. And I feel that there is a lot more potential for me to explore in accessories, because I can actually sell accessories to women of different ages in different markets.
And did you start the business as soon as you came here, or what? You were here, Mark was here in 1993.
Yes.
Which happens to be the first year I came to Vietnam.
Oh.
And you came in 1995. And
yes.
When did you start Ipa-Nima?
I started Ipa-Nima in 1997. And actually what happened is I arrived in 1995. I was looking for an industry I can get into. Law was obviously too hard for me because I was a litigator by training. So obviously I don't speak the language. I don't know any litigation in Vietnam at that time. So I started to explore what Vietnam can do, and can do very well in terms of the handicraft industry, what sort of techniques and skills they're very good in. So I basically spent a whole year, I think, visiting villages or handicraft industry and see what they can do. And then I took samples and I took pictures, and I went back to Hong Kong and I approached brands and department stores in Hong Kong to see whether they have any interest in doing sampling and production in Vietnam. So at that time, or the first year I arrived here, I was working with brands like Shanghai Tang, Goods of Desire, Anti-Prima, and I was helping them to do sample development here up to production. And if a production order is placed with me or in Vietnam, I oversee the whole production. And after a year of working with the brands, I've decided to do my own brand, because I find that it is quite hard I'm the middle person. So of course, if you work with brands, they have very high standards. And Vietnam at that time, it does not have the level of workmanship, you know, to give them the standards that they want. Or by the time I can get them the standards that they want, they already move on to a new designer. So there's a whole new design collection. So I have to start the whole process again. And I think that to a certain extent, that wasn't fair to my local producers, because they try very hard to achieve the look and the standards my customers want. And by the time they get there, you know, the customer have decided to move on to a different item.
Right. And you then decided, obviously, to start your own business.
Yes.
And where does the name Ipa-Nima come from?
I actually chose the name Ipa-Nima because I know that I wanted to make a colorful item, because Vietnam at that time was not a very colorful country, as you can imagine. And I was talking to a Japanese designer friend of mine about choosing a brand name. And then she said to me, well, Christina, you're a very flamboyant person. Your items are very colorful. You should have a South American name. What about Rio, Brazil, you know, the girl from Ipa-Nima? And I said, okay, great, but I can't register a geographical name. So as opposed to Ipanema, which is the Brazilian beach name, I changed it to Ipa-Nima. And that's how the name came from.
Right. It's interesting because it is an interesting name. People have a feeling towards it. And of course, it's easily pronounced, which is very important.
Yes,
and
exactly.
It's not 3 sentences long.
Well, I think at the end of the day, it was actually a good name because even the Vietnamese can pronounce.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have an English name which the Vietnamese cannot pronounce. So I think it is a good name at the end, and it does captures the spirit of my brand because it is very colorful. When you think about Ipanema or the girl from Ipanema, you think of very sultry, sexy, colorful, flamboyant, eccentric, and all these sort of, you know, mood came to mind, which very much embodies the spirit of my collection of my brand.
Right. So were you sort of the first handbag brand in Vietnam? I know there are lots now international brands, but
Yes.
you were the first?
Yes, definitely.
Always the best place to be in marketing.
Well, I think that when you're the first, it does encounter certain difficulties as well. Number one is I remember at that time a lot of my friends thought that I was crazy. You know, if I did clothes, they totally understand why, but bags, why bags? You know, they don't actually understand there is a vision behind it.
Right.
And I think also now when I look back, you know, at that time it was really very limited materials I can use. China at that time was much more developed in terms of bag manufacturing compared to Vietnam. So what I have to do is that finding materials in the local market, using a lot of local elements in my bag, sometimes it's difficult because I cannot get the correct quantity for export, for example, or the same quality because everything comes in little batches. But you sort of circumvent that, you know, eventually you have to start importing stuff and importing materials.
What balance between exporting your products and selling them retail here in Vietnam?
At the moment, I would say that we are probably 60-40.
In favour of export?
In favor of export.
Excellent.
Partly because we have our own manufacturing facility, and we also produce for other brands now. We also produce for other international brands in the US, in France, and also in UK, apart from producing for our own brands. So what we export now is much more than what we retail locally.
Right. Excellent progress. And that's all since 1997?
Yes, it's since 1997, but it's been
it's
20 years since the brand has been set up. Not a short process, Leon.
No,
You see the grey hair here.
But it's good to see progress, isn't it? And it's good to see a success.
It is. Well, we're also facing a lot more competition now. I think one of the biggest hurdle we have to get through at the moment is how to persuade the young Vietnamese consumer to consume inwards as opposed to consuming outwards. Because at the moment, as people started to become more economically rich, they wanted to buy international brands. But
But with a name like Ipa-Nima, doesn't that mean to them a sort of foreign endorsement? Or do they see Ipa-Nima as a purely Vietnamese brand?
I think they see Ipa-Nima as a pure Vietnamese brand.
And
Even though we export overseas, and even though we are seen as, you know, they've seen our bags in the US, I think most people probably think that Ipa-Nima is a brand that have an international recognition, but it's still considered as a local brand because all the items are still made in Vietnam.
Yes. And to a certain extent that is a problem because there is this obsession amongst certainly the young Vietnamese people with overseas brands, international brands.
Yes, it is. And I think the sad thing is because the fashion market at the moment is getting more and more generic. So, and also getting very, very price competitive as well. So you see more and more young people actually buying bigger mid-levels or lower-level brands because they like the look of it, even though the materials or the workmanship is not very good. They might be paying maybe 20% less than something which we produce, but with higher quality materials. For example, we make in leather most of our bags, but the other brands may be making something in plastic leather. But they will still perceive it better in buying an international brand.
Yes, is that because handbags being a fashion item, they have a use life of maybe 1 year, 2 years? How long does a woman keep a handbag?
Well, I suppose it depends on how long your handbag lasts.
Right. So it's fashion but not fashion, in as much as a woman doesn't clear her handbag wardrobe out every year and start again.
Well, I think they do, and I think this is what most of the young people are doing today.
Right.
They are buying a bag which they like the look of it, and they think that, in 6 months and in 1 year's time, this fashion trend is going to finish, and I'm just going to chuck it out. And you can do that, but I think that this whole habit of buying things and chucking things out is not very sustainable, you know? Because in the old days, I remember with my grandmother and my mother days, you buy something very high quality and you sort of treat it as a family heirloom so you can pass it on.
It lasts forever, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
it lasts forever.
Yeah.
But I think that this mentality among the young people probably doesn't exist. They would like, buy something cheap, chuck it out, and like 6 months later, I buy a new one.
Yeah, because they can buy copies as well. One of the problems here is fakes, isn't it?
Yes, it's a very big problem, I think. I think that people is still associating the item a status quo, you know, expensive brands. If I carried certain expensive brands, that means that I have money. But at the same time, I don't think that, well, I'm carrying one which is fake. And it's quite obvious that it is fake because it doesn't look like that you have that sort of money to afford it.
I was trying to buy a leather belt a while ago, and I am not particularly a visible brand man. I could not find a leather belt here in Saigon that didn't have a brand name on it.
I know, isn't that quite sad?
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah. I like quite plain, especially a belt. I mean, a belt's a belt, holds your trousers up. It's not a major fashion item as far as I'm concerned. But I said to somebody, you know, one of the belt sellers, have you got one without a brand? No.
Yes, but I
I could have Calvin Klein, I could have Armani, whatever, but...
You should have asked me, I would have made one for you.
Maybe that's a line you could do.
Yes, definitely. But I think it is sort of sad and it's sort of ironic because you're buying a fake simply because you want to show other people that you can afford it. But at the same time you're buying a fake, it's sort of self-defeating, you know what I mean?
Yes, especially as most fakes are substandard. They're not. There are fakes around that are almost identical copies, and sometimes you think they may have come off the same production line and just been overs on a Friday night, but buying something that's substandard. Do you think the Ipa-Nima brand can be extended beyond handbags, and you're moving into and have moved into accessories? Are there more lines in the future?
Definitely, because not within my own brand, but with other brands that we're working with, we're also doing accessories for men, which means that we're doing handbags and wallets for men. I can definitely see belts, you know, as a natural progression. Maybe even some clothes as well, but probably as a collaboration or crossover with other brands.
Right.
The only item which I don't want to touch is actually shoes, even though bags and shoes normally go together, because shoes is a completely different engineering exercise. And to stock shoes in 8 different sizes and 4 different colors is going to be a big problem, I think.
Yes, logistics there will be a nightmare.
Yes, and I think that, you know, most people don't understand that proper make shoes also depends on the last as well. So unless that you have someone who understands the shoe production and the last between an Asian food, a European food, American food, it's not so it's not easy to make great shoes here.
It's interesting because Vietnam is the second largest exporter of footwear in the world.
Yes, but you're talking about sports shoes, sandals, you know, not really sophisticated like stilettos, heels, women's shoes.
Right. I thought stiletto heel women's shoes was a speciality here, since nearly everybody wears them all the time, even for breakfast.
Yep, I'm not quite sure whether they're made here, maybe.
So where do you see the business growing?
I would see that we definitely see a huge demand now at the moment of brands coming into Vietnam and looking for people like us to do the manufacturing for them, especially since the TPP has been signed. A lot of them started their manufacturing in China, but they're getting quite sick of the high minimums and also the high labor costs. So they're all like prying around Vietnam looking for factories to produce accessories for them. So I can definitely see that there is a lot of exponential growth in that area considering that we have our own factory facilities, and we also provide, design and sourcing assistance to these brands as well. And on the retail front, I would like to see more Ipa-Nima shops developed within Vietnam, because at the moment we have shops in Ho Chi Minh and in Hanoi, but I think that we probably need to have a standalone shop in places like Hoi An or other areas, which are tourist areas, which Vietnam wants to develop.
Yeah. And given that you've spent the last almost 20 years developing a business, what advice would you give? I mean, Vietnam is full of young entrepreneurs dying to get into their own business. What advice would you give people for trying to progress into either the fashion industry or just business in general, manufacturing business and retailing?
I really think, talking from a brand perspective, if people want to do a startup business, they have to have vision as to what they wanted to do and how they're going to differentiate the products from others in the market. I have seen a lot of people who wanted to do startup simply because their friends have done the startup and they think that their friends are making a lot of money and therefore I should go into that. Maybe I can make a lot of money too. And all of a sudden you see 20 people doing exactly the same thing. And I think it is very difficult to survive, And secondly, I think that you need to have a business plan about where you're going to go in a certain year's time, how you're going to grow the business. You have to be very innovative and adapt to market changes as well. And I think the most important thing is to see where your business stands, how is it going to fit into your market, and how it is going to sustain for the next 5 years, even on a short-term basis.
Because I don't like to say unkind things about the Vietnamese because they're wonderful people, but they are known for being not strategic and not thinking far enough ahead. Do you think that will be a barrier, or do you think that the new generation coming through is starting to think more to the future?
I think they are starting to think more about the future, but not detailed enough. I think they have a good idea and obviously they wanted the business to last for a long time, but they don't think about all the details and how to make it work for the long time. So the idea is there, but there is not in-depth research and thought through about how the business plan and the business proposal is going to go. I mean, you can have a big lump sum of money, then you think that, this big lump sum of money is going to last me for 3 years or 4 years. But things change, events change, market change, and what happens if it doesn't? So what are you going to do with the business then?
Yes, it's not just a matter of making something and putting it on sale in a shop somewhere.
Yes, and
I think is one of the tendencies here.
Yes, definitely. And that's what I said, how are you going to differentiate your product from other people selling in the market? And how are you going to communicate that and brand that and market that?
And marketing is, of course, A, more important, and B, is coming into its own here now in Vietnam. I've always been impressed with creativity here by the indigenous people. I remember shortly after I first arrived, one of the things that struck me most was typography. Great use of typography, quite often quite sort of really awakening stuff. Quick question about the government. How do you think they might help businesses like yours? I think you're technically an SME. So how can the government help you guys more and other people like you in terms of TPP is very good for the country because it'll open up all sorts of channels and opportunities, but it'll also add an influx of international retailers.
Yes, that's true. I think one of the issues about TPP is what we are seeing is people are definitely interested to produce in Vietnam in view of TPP. But at the back of their mind, they're also thinking that Vietnam does not have the same resources as in China, especially in our industry, in the handbag industry. Because if you make a handbag, you need to have leather, you need to have lining, you need to have hardware, you need to have zipper, And in China, you can just walk across the road and buy this. Here, it's not so easy because there's not enough factories being set up. So I think with the TPP, maybe there is more factories going to come in or industry going to come in and set up the infrastructure. But the preliminary period, I think that the textile industry and the garment industry is probably going to profit the most.
Right.
In terms of the questions of you asked me about SME, I think I can only say in my business in the fashion industry, I think the government or the media has done quite a lot in the last couple of years with International Fashion Week and Vietnam Fashion Week to promote local brands. But what I'm seeing now is that a lot of the local brands does not have any platform for them to grow.
Right.
Because they can present a collection and they can show the collection at the show, but the rent is actually extremely high in Vietnam at the moment. There is not really a shopping destination where all these brands can group together and be a great shopping destination for the tourist. So I think that the governments need to think about how are you going to create a platform for these local brands to grow and be seen and be promoted. And I think that simply having the International Fashion Week is not enough. Right. You have to maybe promote, have some grants for small brands, so allow them to have an investment in marketing or branding or manufacturing of a small workshop, so they don't have to just rely on their own resources. Secondly, as I said, maybe have an area where they can, at a very minimal cost, so that they have a window for them to display the product and for people to see the brand. They can make it, they can export it. And what I can see now is actually quite sad, because a lot of the money, local money I can see, has gone into real estate. And once you put it in real estate, that means that a lot of money is stuck. There is less money for people to spend and to consume, Yeah. So how is these local brands, even serving local consumers, going to survive if all the local consumers don't have money to buy?
Yes, I mean, real estate is a sponge when it comes to money, as you say. And everybody keeps being told, you've got to have a house, you've got to have an apartment. And so everybody wants one, and they've got nothing to spend.
Yes, and they have nothing to spend, so you're relying on tourists. But where do the tourists go now?
Yeah.
There is at least, I would say, 10 empty shops on Dong Khoi Street, which has been empty for 2 years because the rent is too high.
Yeah. Of course, that is something that the consumer never sort of thinks about in terms of retail pricing, the cost of rental.
Yes.
Staff costs here is famously low, so that's not a problem. But the rental costs here can be extraordinary.
Yes,
Yeah.
and also most of the landlords are also asking for a lot of deposits payment. So as a startup, it might be very difficult for them, to be able to rent a place, unless this is a place, which is owned by a family or a friend.
Right, yeah. And the solution to that is government investment.
I don't think that the government, well, yes, in a way you're right, government investment, but I think that the government should consider having a certain fund, like in Hong Kong we have the Trade Development Council, and in Hong Kong we also have like government funding for SMEs, so that if they wanted to take the money to do a trade show, they can take the money. Of course, there are certain restrictions about how you spend that money when you get the fund from the government. I don't know whether this exists for local brands in Vietnam. I think it will be useful if the government can actually make this grant more accessible, not just to local Vietnamese brands, but also to brands which may be owned by or start up by expats, but employing Vietnamese as staff. And I also think that it would be great if you can have an area where it's for local brands to subsist and to show their products. I mean, in Beijing, we have 798, which is an art district, an old military, I think, factory that turned into an art district with cafes and small boutiques and restaurants, and it become hugely popular with tourists because they go in and can see all these wonderful old architectural or old factories. And some of them are art galleries, so it creates an environment, an artistic environment, a creative environment where attract and draw tourists to go to.
Yes, it's interesting because it is sometimes said that places like Saigon, although tourists come here, after 2 days they've done Saigon.
Yes.
Maybe if there was some quarter somewhere that was developed for not only fashion but anything artisan to give a showcase. That might be quite interesting, because I think overseas visitors are interested in Vietnam and Vietnamese people, as opposed to just coming along and doing international shopping here, which of course is not that cheap.
I totally agree with you. And I think, you know, we are losing more and more of the architecture as well, you know, and I think it will be nice to see an old building being converted into like an artisan area or an artisan village that tourists can go to. And it is part of a process, I think, for economic development also, you know, for a country. Because you look at any other major cities now, they have an artisan area that people can go to. And I think that Ho Chi Minh City or Hanoi should have one as well.
Or both.
Or both,
Both cities
yes.
should, yes. I think it's a shame sometimes when you see some of the old buildings being pulled down.
Yes.
Because that's heritage, and it's interesting that the government is very interested and actually invests a lot of time and money in trying to retain and promote the culture.
Yes.
But then they knock down the buildings.
Yes, I know. It is very sad. And I think that, you know, it's part of the history of Saigon and even Hanoi is in the architecture, you know. And you have so many fantastic old buildings. And once you gut it all out, there is nothing left. So why don't we think of a way and how to incorporate this into the environment that we live in and make it interesting? And at least people can come here and feel that this is part of the old history and the old culture and heritage of Vietnam.
Yes, I'm sure you're right. I'm sure you're right. You've been here doing this for 19 years. So what's going to be happening in 5 years' time, or maybe 10 years' time?
Actually, there's a very interesting question. At the back of my mind, I felt like that I have been very successful in taking Ipa-Nima out of Vietnam. And I would like to be able to do it again in the next 5 years' time. We stopped for a little while because of the global financial crisis. But if the opportunity arises, I would still like to have an Ipa-Nima shop in 1 or 2 destinations out of Vietnam. And that's what I'm working towards.
Is that just because you want to visit them and get more air miles, or because this is an international plan?
I think it is an international flag. I mean, I started Ipa-Nima as a high-quality accessories brand, and part of it is because I wanted to show to the outside world what Vietnam people can do and what they can make, and it's just not within the context of Vietnam. It has an international taste, and it is of an international quality that we can, you know, re-export it out of this country. So I think that's what I would like to do, and that's what I think that we should do if we are going to take Ipa-Nima out of Vietnam and show that, okay, this is a brand which originates in Vietnam, but it doesn't actually, it has an international flavor, and it is of international standards.
With the current emphasis on Vietnam, not only as a result of visits of various dignitaries from various countries, everybody in the developed world seems to be taking much more interest in Southeast Asia and Vietnam in particular. But one of the things I find interesting is when I'm traveling, I say, oh, I'm living in Vietnam at the moment, and they've almost still not heard of it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and don't know exactly where it, couldn't put a finger on it on the map, and have no idea when I start to tell them that, you know, second largest exporter of footwear, as I said, and there's various other major, rice is a major, coffee is a major, pepper is a major, and people have no idea. There doesn't seem to be a program out there promoting Vietnam and make it seem as somewhere, oh, A, I'd like to visit, and B, yes, I appreciate the value, and therefore if I see a Vietnamese brand, I'll view it as something I should be thinking about buying. Yeah.
And actually, I think Vietnam does have an added advantage in this, because, I mean, China is already very well known for mass production. And Vietnam, although have a huge export, as you say, in footwear, they don't actually have, the general consensus seems to be, yes, if you want to make substantial quantity, you can make it in Vietnam. And Vietnam, the attention to details and the quality seems to be better than it once made in China. Or that is the underlying sentiment or feedback that I get.
Yes.
So I think if Vietnam wants to change that and have a reputation that, yes, we produce maybe less quantity than China, but we produce higher quality product, they actually have that edge to promote it and to market it.
Yes. I mean, I went down Jermyn Street in London fairly recently and went into a very well-known tailor, awfully high class, and I tried on a suit which was absolutely perfect apart from the trousers, and I looked in the label and it was Jermyn Street, made in Vietnam. I mean, slightly incongruous. Anyway.
But it's not abnormal these days, you know. I go to some high street brands and I look at a pair of shoes, I turn it around and it's like, oh, made in Vietnam.
And your view of the future for Vietnam?
Sorry?
Your view of the future for Vietnam?
I think it is going to be very interesting times over the next 5 years, looking at what's happening internationally with the TPP, and also locally with the amount of huge, you know, developments and residential and commercial otherwise happening around us. At the back of my mind, I always think that in 5 years' time, Ho Chi Minh City will be very similar to Bangkok. I don't know why. It's just give me that impression. Maybe it's because of all the constructions that is going on. It will be very interesting to see how the consumer market will evolve, because I expect to see more international brands coming in, and how the local brands is going to survive in this expensive commercial environment. I don't know exactly. You know, I think either they're going to grow very quickly or it's going to drop very quickly. But I think it is going to be, I think there's no doubt that Vietnam is going to grow, surely. But whether the local people have a lot of money to spend, I'm not quite sure.
Yes, I think my reading of the confidence factor is that this year confidence is holding up better than it has for the past couple or 3 years. People are enthusiastic after the calendar New Year, and they're very enthusiastic up to Tet, the Lunar New Year.
This year, you mean?
And then afterwards they tend to back off a bit. But this year I believe that the confidence is holding. People I talk to, they seem to be more confident that the business will grow through the year. They do see more consumer spending. One example is you go out for dinner, and once upon a time it will be in a nice restaurant and it will be 90% expats and 10% Vietnamese, and now it's 90% Vietnamese and 10% expats. So they seem to be having the money and now starting to spend it, perhaps not on Dom Khoi.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think it's also possibly because there is a lot more restaurants being opened that is also catered to local as well. But you are right, you know, you definitely see a more mixture between expats and local. But I know what you were saying, that a lot of the locals are more happy to spend money today than a lot of the expats. But with so many apartments being built and so many apartments being bought, whether the liquidity is going to be the same in the next couple of years, I don't know.
We'll have to wait and see.
Yes, we will have to.
And on that note, I would like to say thank you very much indeed for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
It's been more than interesting. Great stuff.
Thank you.
And that concludes CEO Insights for this meeting, this session, and I look forward to welcoming you to our next interview later. Thank you.